Hello, I'm Christian Frasier, and this is The Context.
We'll be discussing with the Israelis what they're going to do, but all 7 of us agree that they have a right to respond.
At that point, we saw the Israeli air defense, the Iron Dome, kick into life. Basically, what that means is they send a lot of defensive missiles up into the sky.
The raging fires in the Middle East are fast becoming an inferno.
Where now for the conflict in the Middle East. 8 Israeli soldiers killed today in the fighting in Lebanon. Israel is promising retaliation against Iran. Joe Biden says he does not support a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. We will have all the reaction from the region tonight and the first edition of the Security Brief. It could hardly be more timely. Mikey Kay will be here to give us his analysis of what is unfolding and where it goes next. A very good evening. Welcome to the programme. The Israeli military has expanded its operations in southern Lebanon, committing more troops to the invasion, and says it has been involved for the first time in close fighting with Hezbollah. 8 Israeli soldiers were killed, 6 in an ambush, 2 by mortar fire. Hezbollah claimed it also destroyed 3 tanks. After last night's attack by Iran, the Israeli defences were called into action again today, the Iron Dome taking out rockets fired from Lebanon. In New York, the Security Council expressed its alarm and frustration at where things are heading. The Secretary-General, once again, calling for restraint.
We must never lose sight of the tremendous toll this growing conflict is taking on civilians. And we cannot look away from systematic violations of international humanitarian law. This deadly cycle of tit-for-tat violence must stop. Time is running out, and I thank you.
The Israeli Defence Forces said 182 missiles were fired by Iran. The military has acknowledged that air bases were hit, the damage largely to office buildings and maintenance areas within the bases. Nothing, we're told, that would unduly affect the Air Force's operations. In fact, overnight they were flying more missions over Beirut, and today residents in 20 villages in southern Lebanon were told to move out by the Israeli forces. Here's our Middle East correspondent, Lucy Williamson.
Israel's Air Force was defending other targets when Iran's missiles came, slipping through defences to hit several air bases, like this one at Nevatim. Another, narrowly missing an intelligence base in Tel Aviv. The crater it left filled with visions of what if. The US said this attack had twice the scope of Iran's last bombardment in April. Not all the targets hit were military. One landed in this residential suburb of Tel Aviv. Neighbours rushing through repairs before the Jewish New Year tonight.
Close.
Temporary solutions to the problems of a regional war. 83-year-old Shmulik's home, one of more than 100 houses damaged here.
Everybody was scared because the blast, it was an enormous blast. And when we get out of the shelter, we saw something not from this world. All the house was with glasses, no windows, no doors.
The impact site, around 100 meters from his front door. Another what if. This is the second time in 6 months that Iran has attacked Israel directly. Actions that were once seen as red lines are now becoming routine. Each time, the line between message and miscalculation is paper thin. And each time, demands a response. Israel's Prime Minister last night promised a response would come.
Iran made a big mistake tonight, and it will pay for it. The regime in Iran does not understand our determination to defend ourselves and to retaliate against our enemies.
Israel has been crossing red lines of its own, sending these soldiers into Lebanon this week. A limited and targeted incursion, it says, to destroy Hezbollah tunnels. But another 4 brigades were called up today, and villagers in the south of Lebanon told to leave their homes and move north. Also today, the first Israeli casualties, airlifted out of the combat zone. 8 killed and others injured in a confrontation with Hezbollah fighters, the BBC understands. The risks of old conflicts weighed against the risks of playing by new rules. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Israel.
Well, let's bring you right up to date. Just before we came on air, we spoke to our correspondent, Nick Beake, who is on that northern border.
Well, this has been the second full day of Israel's invasion into South Lebanon, and the first time that the Israeli troops have come face to face with the Hezbollah fighters. We got reports very early in the day that Hezbollah were claiming that they had ambushed some of those Israeli troops, with reports of some casualties. It wasn't until later in the day that the Israeli Defense Forces confirmed that 8 of their soldiers had in fact been killed. They were all in their early 20s. We also heard that 7 soldiers were injured, and some of them were taken to a hospital nearby by helicopter. You can hear a helicopter at the moment. This has been happening all day, both Israeli jets and helicopters high in the sky above us. The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu paid tribute to the fallen soldiers, saying that they had died in the middle of a tough war against Iran and its proxies. Israel also said today that it would be sending many more soldiers to this part of northern Israel. The border with Lebanon is just across there, but I think what we've seen today, the Israeli casualties in particular, goes to show that this is a very difficult fight for the Israelis. Mr. Netanyahu says it's an essential one, but nonetheless extremely difficult in the days and weeks to come.
Let me show you, in fact, the live images that we're seeing of that Israeli-Lebanon border. You can see that for the moment it is pretty calm, but we're continuing to watch that. Mikey Kay is sitting by here in the studio. We're going to get his thoughts on what has been quite an extraordinary 24 hours. We'll get to that after this break. We'll be right back after this. Okay. I'm told that we're not actually going to go to the break. So let's start with our new feature, which we call the Security Brief. Here it is. All sorts of gremlins at this side, but we'll sort that out. I mentioned last week, going forward, we're going to bring you each week an in-depth military briefing, which I hope will provide you some context on the national security decisions that are being made in Jerusalem and Washington right now. And the man who's going to help us do that is Mikey Kay. He's a former senior officer in the British military. He flew assault helicopters for 20 years. He's going to run these briefings as he would do it for the military. So we're going to start, Mikey, with the Iranians, the course of action, what you would know in the business as COA, that the Iranians went for last night. The distances involved, the capability they have. What did you see?
Yeah, there's an incredible amount to digest, to assess and to analyse. I think the most important thing to look at first, as you pointed out, Christian, is the map distances. So slide. The distances are not insignificant, and if we look at this graphic, we can see the distances that we have between Tehran and some of the major cities inside Israel, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. You're looking at 985 miles from Tehran to Tel Aviv and about 970 miles from Tehran to Jerusalem. And what's important with these distances is that allows us to assess what type of capability that Iran has in terms of a ballistic missile threat. Slide. And the three main ballistic missile systems that pop out are the Hajj Qasim, named after Qasim Soleimani, who was the former commander of the Quds, the Khyber, and the Shahab-3. The Hajj Qasim has about a range of 870 miles, and the Khyber about 900 miles. So as you can already see from those distances, they're on the farther outer reaches of their capability. So may not be launched from the Tehran area, but more west, just to sort of to extend that range a little bit. And then you've got the Shahab 3, which has got a significantly greater range of about 1,200 miles. The question, though, that I think you were interested in is there's a lot of talk, isn't there, about the Fatah 2?
Well, I've seen on Twitter that people thought that this was the new missile that Iran was using. It's a hypersonic missile. But I think we've got some video, haven't we, of the Fatah 2, these mobile launchers that they might have used. The Pakistani military have a similar capability, so we've taken some video from them. But are you saying it would be a similar thing? And why do you have a problem with some of this reporting, given the distances that you've just talked about?
Yeah, there's a lot of chatter on social media, on news reporting about the Fatah 2. It is a hypersonic missile. That gives it a capability of Mach 5 plus. But the thing that really jumps out at me, and the problem I've got with this, is that Jane's, for example, report that the far reaches of the Fatah 2 is just 400 kilometres, about 250 miles. So if we go back to the distance map, obviously there's something slightly awry there. Now, what we can see from this footage is that is a Fatah 2 system, and you can see that it's mobile. It can either be wheeled or it can be tracked. So for me, the only way that the Fatah 2 could actually hit Israel is if it was deployed mobily into somewhere like Syria. And if you put that system within the region of Damascus, that would give it range to target the main points in Israel, but only if it's deployed.
So just as we look at this, I think we'll see the distances again. With that in mind, and as in a military ops room of the kind that you've been in, would they be piecing this together and sort of working out where some of this stuff would come from? I mean, there would presumably be satellite imagery of some of these missiles leaving the launchers. But will there still be some confusion as to whether they were actually fired from Iran or whether some of them were fired from closer in the region?
Yeah, well, there's a vacuum of information of the locations of where the Fatah 2 capability has come from. But from the analysis that I've been conducting and we've been discussing today, the only way that could have targeted Israel is if it was deployed into Syria. Now, if it's deployed into Syria, then you've instantly got collaboration between Bashar al-Assad and the Iranian regime. So obviously that's then going to implicate Syria, which is going to open Syria up to potential targeting from Israel.
Let's talk about Israel's missile defence, because I think it was pretty extraordinary last night. 182 missiles fired. I said at the top that there's been some damage around the air bases, but they've taken down most of the missiles as they came in. Now, there's this layered system in place, which we've talked about on the BBC over the last 24 hours. There is the Arrow for this high-altitude interception. There's the David Sling for the medium range, and then the Iron Dome for the short-range threats, the sort of rockets that are coming over the border from Hezbollah. Just explain to us how some of this works.
Yeah, sure. If we can go slide again. Let's start with the outermost reaches. You've got the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3. The Arrow 2 is an older system, a ballistic system that can go out to long range, about 2,400 kilometres. The Arrow 3 is very new, and what that system does is actually can engage targets outside of the Earth's atmosphere. And from a lot of the people I've been talking to, the Arrow 3 system and the Arrow 2 system are the main systems that the Israelis rely on in order to counter a lot of those 182 inbound ballistic missiles from Iran. If we then come back, we've got the David Sling, as you rightly pointed out. That's stationary, but that has a range of about 190 miles. So anything that breaks through those Arrow 2s and Arrow 3s will then be targeted by the David Sling. Now, what's really interesting is when you come into the Iron Dome system. Mm-hmm. The Iron Dome has been in operation since 2011. It's a 24/7 capability. It's all weather, and it's got 360-degree cover. So that in itself is hugely important. It's broken down into three parts. Mm-hmm. You've got the target tracking radar. Mm-hmm. You've got the actual interception missile itself, the interceptor missile itself. That's called the Tamir, and that's in all the batteries. There's thought to be around 10 batteries surrounding Israel to give them full cover. And then you've got the C2 system, that basically provides the software that allows the target tracking radar to then talk to the missile. Now, the range of that is around 2.5 to 44 miles. So, you can imagine if this system is engaging targets at 2.5 miles over urban areas, that's going to be quite a shock for a lot of people because of the noise. Yeah, the Iron Dome system is quite phenomenal. It's got a very, very high percentage rate of intercept, but also we shouldn't forget that as part of this layered defence system, you've got two US naval warships in the Mediterranean who are firing interception missiles as well to try and counter those 182 coming in.
OK, so I'm building to a point here because the cost of each of these Arrow missiles is $1.5 million. They estimate Israel spent $850 million on that technology in April alone, when the Iranians first fired over that first volley of missiles. So when we talk about this war of attrition, and we talk about the distances these missiles are travelling, is this sustainable if there were further and repeated attacks? And does that feed into the decisions the strategic military planners like you would be making in Jerusalem?
Yeah, I think this is a really, really interesting question, and we spoke about it at length today. If we can go slide, please. We're just going to bring up now the distances again. Not insignificant. And I think the really important piece about this analysis is Israel will be looking very, very closely at what logistical resupply and reloading they have of the Arrow 2 and 3, of David Sling, of the Tamir missiles. And they're going to be making very, very close calculated decisions on when they're effectively going to run out. Mm-hmm. So if I'm a military strategic planner in Jerusalem, what I don't want to do is, if I know that the resupply system is low, and the resupply will obviously come from people like the United States, what I wouldn't want to do is provoke Iran into another 182 ballistic missile attack, knowing that that would bring the levels down to a point where the Iron Dome would become vulnerable, not because of the system itself, but because of the physical resupply.
So this is really important, isn't it? Because if you think about the Americans at the moment, they're supplying Patriot missiles, and I know Patriots are involved in this cover as well. Yeah. They are supplying the Ukrainians at the moment. There's a lot of pressure on resupply for the Americans. Are you saying then that when Benjamin Netanyahu talks this very tough game about there will be repercussions at the time of our choosing, one thing that he will be told in his ear is, hang on, let's just check what we've got and what the retaliation might look like before we go out and start targeting in Iran?
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to the analogy of strategic military planning inside Jerusalem, you are going to be talking to the US and having a very close conversation on what the stockpiles are, where the resupply is in terms of the global supply chain, and what that means in terms of how Patriot is contributing towards the outer reaches. So Patriot, the missile system, will collaborate with the Arrow 2 and Arrow 3. So they are very, very long distance. And there might be resilience and redundancy in terms of Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 being able to take that up, but absolutely right. It is a very important consideration that planners will be taking into account when they're going through the targeting cycle. OK, so we talked about the COA for Iran and what they're thinking at their side. Let's talk about the Israeli COA. What options are on the table for them? Well, I mean, again, this goes back, it's a really interesting point. And if we can go to slide, please. The potential targets that I can see are obviously the nuclear facilities, the enrichment of uranium. And then you've got other facilities such as oil, which will damage Iran economically. But then you've also got targets such as their air defence systems. Mm. And I think one of the huge questions about an Israeli response, what is that course of action? It's most likely the ML COA that we call it, the most likely COA, will be to put some form of package together involving fixed-wing aviation. Slide. What we can see up here, Christian, are the potential flight paths of what a package would look like. Now, in order for Israel to get a package of fighters, which are suppression of enemy air defence, which maybe be refuelers, because obviously it's a significant journey there and back. It could be ELINT aircraft, such as the rivet joint, that basically suck up lots of electronic information that involves SAMs on the ground. It's a formidable consideration and package to have to put together and plan. If we look at the flight routes, if we can go back to slide, please. If we look at the flight routes that we've got on the map there, you've got 4 potential considerations. The route down the south is obviously the longest and wouldn't require any approval or coordination with the country. But the most direct route, as you can see, is over Saudi Arabia and maybe Kuwait. So in order for them to use the Saudi Arabian route, they are going to have a lot of coordination with the Saudis and basically coordinate this huge package coming through their airspace and come back again. So, that's a huge consideration when it comes to what the Israelis could do in terms of a fixed-wing strike. That southern route that goes around
through the Gulf of Aden, around Saudi Arabia and up into Iran. I mean, you're talking about presumably a refueling operation, hugely technical. Then what? Because a lot of these nuclear facilities are, we're told, deep underground. They're in mountainous situations. What are the Israeli jets, if that is an option? And Prime Minister, I mean, we'll talk about the debate that's going on around that. But if it is really an option, what are those Israeli pilots flying into?
Well, this then comes down to the breakdown of the package, and the cycle that they use is called F2T2EA, which is find, fix, target, track, engage, and assess. And there are parts of that package. It could be an F-35 stealth fighter, it could be an F-15 or an F-16 that would more likely have on board a cruise missile. A cruise missile is it's the Delilah that the Israelis have. It's got a range of about 250 kilometers. If you look at what the Israeli defense systems are, which is have a range out of about 120 kilometers, then that would be a suitable weapon because they can launch it standoff, and the fighters then don't get engaged inside what's called the MES, the missile engagement zone of Israeli air defenses. So all of these things, in that F2T2EA sort of cycle, will be taken into account, and each jet, so for example the F-35 has a stealth capability, that can obviously get a little bit closer because it's got a reduced radar cross-section than say an F-16 or an F-15. So the F-35 more likely will be used for what's called SEAD, suppression of enemy air defense. So the F-35s will take out air defense, surface-to-air missile systems, and then you have things like assets like F-16s and F-15s that would be potentially used with a cruise missile standoff to be able to take out whatever targets they have. And some cruise missiles these days, like Storm Shadow, they're penetrators as well, so they can actually penetrate bunkers and things that are deep underground.
I mean, it's fascinating because I think a lot of people listening to that, some of it certainly goes over my head, some of the analogies, but it certainly does give you an idea that it's just not let's take off, let's go to Iran. I mean, there is an enormous amount of logistical work that's going on right now in Israel, if indeed the retaliation is coming. Of course, the other target for Israel is Hezbollah, and the ground invasion, as we've reported, is underway. Difficult for our viewers sometimes, Mikey, to get an understanding of the topography across that border. Once you leave Israel, heading into Lebanon, it's not just a case of rolling across the border, is it?
No, it's not. And if we can bring up slide, please. This will give viewers an indication of the type of topography that you're looking at. So if you're looking at the bottom of the picture, that's a town called Kiryat Shimon, and that has received a lot of heavy fire rockets from Hezbollah, and obviously a lot of those inhabitants have been internally displaced, and that's what Netanyahu's talking about when he wants to restore calm, restore peace in the northern area of Israel. If we then go, slide please. If we then go to the next slide, this is an area where we know that IDF armour has been gathering in order to cross into.
So that's the UN blue line that we can see. That's the demarcation line.
Yeah, exactly.
And Marun al Ras, actually, that is the spot just over the border there where that engagement today that we were talking about, the 3 tanks, that around that area, that's where they were hit.
Exactly,
but what you see actually is that actually Hezbollah are on an elevated position as those tanks come in.
Yeah, and let's not forget, I mean, that topography shows quite nicely just how difficult it is for Israeli tanks to navigate that type of terrain. It's uphill and the roads are slow. But let's not forget, Christian, this isn't just about Hezbollah. There's a course of action that Iran could take that could flood southern Lebanon with militia groups, Shia militia groups, all around the region, from IRGC inside Iran, from Popular Mobilization Forces inside Iraq. You've got the Syrian army that have been heavily involved in Hezbollah over the last 10 years, supporting Bashar al-Assad. So the last 10 years, supporting Bashar al-Assad. So yeah, we can see it up there, IRGC. And then we have the Popular Mobilization Forces inside Iraq. They were pretty significant when it came to all of the US operations inside Iraq. And then Syria, we've got the Syrian army. We spoke about that in terms of they're battle hardened. They work very closely with Hezbollah in the past. Let's not forget the Houthis in Yemen. They've been battle hardened as well in terms of what they've been dealing with down there with the Saudis.
What about kit? Because the Americans found to their cost when the Iranians flooded the zone in Iraq, the armoured capability really did come under pressure.
Yeah, so, brilliant question. So the Iranians designed a IED called the EFP, which is the explosive forced penetrator. And what that effectively is I think we can bring up a slide actually of what an EFP looks like, but there we go. It's basically a can with explosives and a copper plate in it. And when the explosives go off, it melts the copper and turns the copper into a quite a potent projectile. And the use of this inside Iraq was deadly against US armour. So you imagine you've got these tanks, you've got the high ground, you've got the close roads, you've got the bottlenecks. If you get these militants groups coming in with that experience of EFPs and they start putting IEDs in the road, then that can prove very problematic, and Israel could get quagged down in that area of South Lebanon quite quickly.
It's truly fascinating, and it gives an impression that although Hezbollah has been subdued, it's certainly not out, and lots of threats to the Israeli military. I love the slide and the military effect of how we've done that. Mikey, we'll do it again soon. That is the Security Brief. We'll do it every week. Mikey Kay, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
We'll be right back after this.
Hello. Well, northern parts of the UK have had plenty of sunshine today, but yet again across England, it's been a cloudy picture with frequent showers. Really, the weather has left a lot to be desired, certainly after that wet September. Here's the good news if you want some drier and brighter weather. Thursday, Friday, and to an extent into Saturday, the weather is looking a little bit better. Gap in the clouds at the moment, with high pressure building across the UK. And in fact, as we go through the course of this evening, skies all tend to clear across the bulk of the country. The winds are going to be light, so that means it is going to turn quite chilly. Early on Thursday morning, in some spots, north or south, temperatures could be just a few degrees above freezing, and that's in sheltered areas out of town. Some mist and fog in places too, but in bigger cities and around coastal areas, I think around 6 to 9 degrees. So high pressure, firmly in charge of the weather on Thursday, anchored across the UK. That means light winds, prolonged sunshine, scattered fair weather clouds, and this is from early morning onwards right through the course of the day. So we've got a beautiful Thursday on the way, and I think it'll feel pleasant enough. The temperatures will be somewhat below the average for the time of the year, but we could do worse. Around 15 degrees in Glasgow, 16 expected in the south of the country. Now, Thursday into Friday, that high pressure is going to show signs of slipping away a little bit towards the east, giving way to Atlantic weather fronts, and that does spell cloud and at least some rain across Ireland and also into western parts of Scotland. But the further east and southeast you are, the better the weather will be on Friday. And I think beautiful weather on the way for East Anglia and the southeast. 17 Celsius expected in London. Further north, I think it'll be a little fresher, maybe 13 to 15 degrees. So that's how we end the week. Here's a look at the weekend and into next week. Low pressures once again sweeping off the Atlantic, and it is looking distinctly unsettled in the days ahead. In fact, here we have the tail end of an Atlantic hurricane potentially heading our way. It's still a long way off, but it means that there's plenty of wet and windy weather in the forecast in the days ahead. So here's a look at the weekend, steadily going downhill, and then we've got rain icons pretty much for most of next week, but the temperature is still hovering around the mid-teens. That's it for me. Bye-bye.
The 2024 US election looks set to be one of the most extraordinary yet. Could there be further shocks ahead in this historic race to the White House? Get the latest headlines in the BBC News app. Get in-depth coverage on bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story of the US election on BBC News.
Michael Palin. Boy George, Juliette Binoche, welcome to This Cultural Life. Some of the world's leading artistic figures revealed to me their influences.
Suddenly there was a little glimpse that perhaps there was a future doing comedy.
And the experiences that have inspired their own work.
Art is so important because it really can transform you inside.
I'm very different to the person I was 10 years ago.
For a fascinating insight into what fires the creative imagination, join me, John Wilson, for This Cultural Life. Watch on iPlayer.
When the weather can't make up its mind, we can help you make up yours. Check on the BBC Weather app.
Hello, I'm Christian Frasier. You're watching The Context on BBC News. Israel warns Iran will pay for its missile attacks. Iran promises any retaliation will meet an even stronger response. We'll get to that very shortly. First, let's get a check on the sport. Here's Gavin.
Yes, thanks very much indeed, Christian. We'll start with the football, and we're underway in Wednesday's Champions League games of Real Madrid, Liverpool and Bayern Munich all in action. In the games that kicked off half an hour ago, Bayern are at Premier League side Aston Villa, reprising that 1982 European Cup final match, which Villa won. Pau Torres, though, has had a goal ruled out for Villa for offside in the build-up, so a bit of an escape there for Bayern so far after VAR, that one. Benfica have an early lead. Kerem Atatürklu with the goal against Atletico Madrid, 1-0 to them. Lille and Real Madrid is goalless at the moment, and Liverpool are 1-up against Bologna. Alexis McAllister with the goal for Liverpool. RB Leipzig are currently hosting Juventus, and they have just scored in that one there. Looks like Benjamin Sesko's given them the lead. And in the earlier kickoffs, a big win for Atalanta against Shakhtar, with Feyenoord edging out Girona. Carlos Alcaraz came from a set down to beat the world number one Yannick Sinner in a dramatic China Open final in Beijing, ending the Italian's 15-match winning streak. The match had to be decided on a tie-break, with Alcaraz winning 7 stunning points in a row to claim victory, including that one there. It's the Spaniard's 4th title of the year and his 16th of his career, and he's now won all 3 of his meetings with Sinner this year, and afterwards admitted the match was too close for comfort.
I didn't lose the hope, but I thought, okay, I have to give everything that I have, just to try to give myself, the opportunity